Great. So yeah, we're gonna talk about DevOps cookbook, basically how to build a smooth process with your development team. My name is Maria. I work as a DevOps engineer at Citrix. And what we have for today, I'm gonna talk a bit about DevOps role in a project lifecycle, how to set an achievable goals, how to audit your application, and what actually I can have in my I have in my tool set to make developers' life a bit easier. So let's start from DevOps role in a project lifecycle. Basically, as a DevOps engineer, you can join the project at any stage. It will be the perfect case when you can join at the early stage. Then you can impact the process. You can help with CI/CD pipelines and etc. But usually, our help required only on deployment or maintenance step. And honestly, during my career as a DevOps engineer, I often faced a very challenging projects when you need to, for example, migrate the whole application to the brand new environment. And it was some cases when you don't have any developers in your team, where project will be on hold during some uncertain time, and you need to gather as much information as you can while developers are still here, are still willing to help. That's why I want to tell you more about interaction between DevOps engineers and development team, and how you can actually perform an audit for some project as well. So regarding achievable goals, I suggest you let's say before doing any task, just try to plan your work. And if you set goals like realistic, if you collaborate with developers and you ask what the problems they have at the moment. So for example, it could be anything from a lot of rolled back releases to just lack of core development processes, with Kubernetes. You can try to use SMART approach. I personally would suggest it because it allows you to specify the target goal. You can just answer simple questions: what actually you want to do, how will you know when your goal is successfully accomplished, right? If you can do it alone or you need some external support, and the most important, when exactly do you want to accomplish it. So you should be time specific, just define how many time you need to achieve some goals. And I prepared some good and bad examples regarding this. So I often see some tasks like audit the project, configure deployment, configure monitoring, and it's okay to have tasks like this, but when you have really tight interaction with development team, you should be more specific, because they need to understand the target goal. What are you actually wanna get at the end? So for example, if you wanna just audit the project, you can't measure this task. You can't say what the final result will be, and it's better to rephrase this goal to something more specific, like solve 5 most critical problems in the infrastructure of Service X. And this description will help managers, team leaders, your teammates to understand more specifically what you're trying to do, how to measure it, because you have like some like defined points, right? You have 5 most critical problems, and you wanna fix them in the infrastructure. And of course, audit the project can be the part of some goals. It's okay, but in this project, you can specify the part that you wanna audit. Or maybe you want to work with documentation, maybe you want to work with monitoring stuff, or maybe with infrastructure. Then you can be more specific with estimations, with final result, and etc. Regarding configure deployment to new AWS region, it seems to be okay. But for example, if you want to take a vacation, or you will be reassigned to another project, one of your teammates should like take care of this activity. And if your teammate will have description like that, it can be a bit obscure, and it will really hard to understand what is going on here. So if you rephrase it to more specific, configure deployment for all components of Service X to Kubernetes in AWS U West 1 region, your teammate will have like certain points that can allow to estimate this activity, to break it down to some smaller steps, smaller tasks, and it will be much easier to start working on this activity. And the last one, configure monitoring for Service X, is also okay, but it's not very clear what actually should be done in scope of this task, because I can deploy the whole Prometheus stack, or I can just configure some small parameters in the application configuration, right? So it will be really difficult to estimate this task if you don't know what exactly should be done in scope of this task. And it can be rephrased to be more certain. So if you actually need to deploy Prometheus, it's better to specify it in the task. For example, maybe you need to deploy Prometheus but not Grafana and etc. You can just write it down, and you can specify the environment for which you need to accomplish this, or for all environments, for example, because for sandbox environment it can be easier than for production, and you need to spend more time for this exact activity. Also, I want to emphasize that in every example, we have a time period when this activity should be accomplished. So we have quarters, or we have sprints, and it can be more clear for like external people like managers or team leaders to prepare, some high level overview of what team is doing right now, what is their focus, and it's just better communication at the management level. So this is just an examples. During my presentations, there are a bunch of links, and you can explore it. I think after the meetup, I will share the presentation. So if you are interested in some topic, you can follow the links and learn more. And regarding audit of application, I want to say that it can be really hard to review the whole service, the whole bunch of microservices, especially if there are a lot of a lot of components with really tight integration with some external services. But you should be pretty sure about your goals, and if you understand that you need to improve like monitoring and logging stuff, try to focus on this part, and do not try to do everything. If you see some bad configurations in a Docker file or Kubernetes manifests, you can create a technical debt, but you shouldn't like try to solve them all at one time. Try to be more focused on what's currently important for the developers and for the processes, and try not to solve everything. So starting from audit, I want to emphasize the importance of documentation. And when you review documentation, you should be, again, pretty sure about what the goal you want to achieve. And I suggest you to focus on goal to have enough documentation to be able effectively support or hand over a project. And in this case, you will try to have enough documentation, right? So you can support your application, you can deploy it, you can somehow debug it, maybe with developers' help, but it's like a constant process of improving docs, and maybe it's better to have some, let's say, mm, some critical items, not all of them. I would suggest you to check if your service, your project has an architecture diagram with just main components and interactions between them. It's better to have this like picture, because with this you can actually gather some minimum required information to start actually working. Also, usually documentation contains a list of external dependencies. So, for example, if you use some cloud services like S3 buckets or some cloud managed databases, it's better to have these dependencies specified. Also, configuration management, if you have a bunch of environment variables, it will be useful to have them listed, maybe with some examples of their values, and like a short description why we actually need them. Local development procedure is very obvious. If development team has a new teammate, it will be easier for this person to actually start working on the project, on the real task, if we will have some start point, to point. Just say we have like this procedure described in the docs. You can check it. If you find some problems or misconfigurations, you can like try to ask, or maybe you can update the documentation as well. And also for DevOps engineers, it's important to have some ops documentation, like monitoring, logging, debugging, deployment, and all of this stuff. So it's just an example of what we can have in documentation. It's not required to have all of these items, but they can be really useful for some projects. How actually start talking about writing docs? Writing docs is very boring for most of the people, and you will be very lucky if someone from a development team loves writing docs. But actually, your role as a DevOps engineer usually initiate some processes, and if you see that some crucial parts are missing, try to initiate a process and try to lead this process, because you should explain why this specific item is important, and try to help in any way as you can. If you have some templates for docs, it will be a great start point, because sometimes you come to the project and there is no documentation at all, and it's will be easier for developers to start writing it when they have some template, or maybe even a good example, because they can understand why those items are valuable, and why they actually need them for their project as well. And also try to be specific as possible, not just please create me an architecture diagram. Try to emphasize that they should specify all of the components, maybe network interactions between components, maybe they need to add some internal services that application uses all the time, and it will be important for them to understand all of the requirements, because they will be happy to do this operation only once. And it's really important to get the required result for you, because it's important for you to proceed with the project and learn more about components and how it works. The next part is a DevOps audit. It's more about processes and integration of our application inside the company services with our customer and etc. So basically, you should check CI/CD pipelines, release process, how actually we bring new version of our service to the customers, how this new version is deploying right now, and what is the process when our customer has some problems on production. It means that we should all participants in this process should understand what are the actions, how the problem should be escalated, and what is the expected result, right? So it can be a task to the development team, or it can be a separate support team, and this team will try to resolve problem first. So it can varies from company to company. At this point, also try to be focused, and our goal is to find bottlenecks in the current development process. Again, you shouldn't fix all problems. You should try to understand what actually bothers developers, and maybe there are some problems with stability of CI/CD pipelines or etc. And you can mark it as a task to take into account right now, or you can also create some technical debt related to DevOps activities, and maybe you will have time to look through it at the end of your work on the project. So again, if you want to be successful as a DevOps engineer, you should communicate with developers a lot and ask them about their development process, how they deal with technical debt tasks, how they do the code review, and etc. etc. So if they have some problems, you should take care of it. Maybe you should try to investigate what is the root cause of some problems, and this audit can help you with it. Check all CI/CD pipelines. It's a common step. You should check maybe there are some missing steps for particular programming languages. Maybe they use some bad patterns, or you can bring new best practices, and it will increase stability and quality of the code. So you can just check all these files, and also you can check build and deployment configurations. It's very common problem when there is a lack of versioning for Docker images, for some packages, and etc. etc. And it can cause potential problems with deployment, with stability, with debugging, and so on. So that's it for DevOps audit part. It can be, of course, scaled to more steps, but I think it's the main one. Regarding infrastructure audit, it's a bit complicated because infrastructure is a huge topic, and in current realities, we have a lot of different approaches to infrastructure, and it's really depends from your like specific case, but again, try to configure the right goal during your audit. Try to understand what actually you want to achieve, and I suggest you to concentrate on following goal when you're trying to check if infrastructure meets the requirements. It can be anything from reliability to high availability, and for each of these cases you will have like different possible configurations and different approaches to verify if actually our infrastructure meets those requirements or not. You can start from checking technologies and tools that was used to provision this infrastructure. You can try to define what is the type of environment. Do we have only cloud, or we have only self-hosted environments, or we have hybrid infrastructure? So, for example, part of our services are in cloud, and another part, maybe it can be a legacy, it's in our self-hosted environment. And of course, in these cases, there are different approaches and steps that you can take. And the last one is the environment configuration. Of course, there are a lot of ways to provision environments, and you can check how actually they were provisioned. So it can be really various approaches. In some companies use only Ansible. In some companies, it can be only Terraform because they work with clouds only, or it can be another tool like Puppet, Chef, or something else. Of course, if you have some defined requirements, you can start from this point. But if you don't have, you can try to communicate with maybe managers or product owners or maybe development team, and they will try to like maybe specify, the one or two that you should definitely take care of. Also, it's important to check the process around config management tools. Sometimes the lack of process can bring a lot of problems. So if you don't have proper versioning code review for infrastructure related files, it will cause a lot of problems in the future, or it already does. So you should try to define if it can be really critical for you, or you can just again add those problems to the technical debt. Also, it's very common when those tools, those infrastructure services are like not very fresh versioned, right? It's like they were updated only once at the project start, and that's it. Of course, it can be a problem from security perspective because usually there are a lot of tools that have a lot of security issues, and they of course fixes sometime, but in the future releases, and it's important to upgrade it in time. And also maybe you will need some new features, but you can't do it like you can't upgrade right now. You need to understand if it worth it or not. And of course it's not a whole list, but it's like some points that you can start with. Maybe you can add more and more, and it's great. But I was trying to like create some basic list with steps. Maybe we can upgrade it a bit later when will be a new X tool that we need to take care of. So yeah, that's it from infrastructure perspective. And of course, we have security side because we live in the world of web applications, and our web applications interact with users, and users want to be safe, want to save their data, their passwords, their emails, and etc. And for security perspective, our goal is to minimize security risk for environments and users. Of course, we can't reduce it to zero, but we can take some actions against again, like Docker files, Kubernetes manifests. We can verify if they contains required configuration against malicious software or not. We can use or manual checks or automatic checks. There are a lot of different tools. Also, we can check environment configuration. So, for example, do we have private Kubernetes clusters or not? Do we have configured firewall rules? It can be also important to have some overview of these settings. The next one is user permissions and roles. Maybe it's a good time to do a review. Maybe some users exceed their permissions. Maybe you can optimize the roles that we've been using. And also very important, it's secret management. It's important to understand how secrets are managed for your service. Maybe for now it's just a plain text, and you can easily move it to something more secure, especially if you have some company-wide solution. You can suggest to help with migration to this solution. I think developers will be glad to make their application more secure, because in the future they will have less problems with it. How actually you can perform the security audit? Just a simple steps, as I said, automatic checks or manual checks. It depends from the size of the project and from your let's say abilities at the time. Also, if you have a dedicated security team in the company, you can ask them to perform an audit. You can specify to which repositories or services look through in the first order. Maybe you have some guesses where they should start. And also a review of secrets management. It's also very important, because sometimes there are really crucial problems that can be solved with GitLab repo settings, for example. And the last one, from audit perspective, it's observability. It's very common that in a project this site is very poor, I would say, because it requires some expertise from developers to actually have a good monitoring and logging configuration, because it's not very easy to debug in general, and it's hard to define how actually you should debug your application. And at this point, goal can be something like that, like have all the sources to investigate any problem. And if you have like simple application and it's enough to have just logs, you can have just logs, because your application can be monitored by another solution. You can monitor just process, you can monitor disk usage, CPU usage, and etc. But if you have like complicated high load application, it's better to have some logs, some metrics and alerts for application in the first order. But it's also important to have metrics and alerts for infrastructure, CI/CD pipeline, security issues as well, because application is still running on the underlying infrastructure, and if something wrong with infrastructure, we should know about it, right? Because it can reflect on the application itself. How actually check if everything is fine or not? You can start from checking logs, its format, if everything is fine from this perspective, if it looks okay for you, or maybe you have some policy inside your company. You can validate those logs against this policy. After that, just try to search something related to the service in log aggregator, and if you see that it works fine, then it's fine. If you see that logs, for example, logs with exceptions or huge errors are divided into several log messages in Elasticsearch, it should be fixed, because in the case of the problems, it will be really hard to debug the problem, because you will have like thousands of lines and it will be useless in case of real production problem. Regarding monitoring, usually if application has some metrics, then it will have some dashboards in Grafana. If there is no monitoring, I think that there is no dashboards, and you can start from helping to define what metrics should be added to the application. And it's not that hard. If you have a web application, you can start from the count of requests, their duration, count of errors, count of users, and etc. And if you have some, I know, maybe queue service, you can just count number of events that are waiting, that are processed, and etc., and build a simple Grafana dashboard that developers can check in case of any like problems on production or any other environment. Also, it's important to check alerts if they cover critical problems, and you can take some actions for these alerts, because it's really common to have alerts that are not actionable, and you should help with like cleaning this up. Maybe if developers complaining about amount of alerts or that they are useless, you can just review those alerts, maybe add some new alerts, and it will clear the situation. For, let's say, for start point of application metrics, I added some links on this slide, so you can check it if you are interested. And the last step that I want to mention is that if you have like really huge number of microservices, and there are a lot of problems with debugging their communication, and there are a lot of chains of requests between them. So, for example, your application ask backend, backend ask another backend, and etc., etc., and it can be really hard to debug the problems with those chains. You can try to integrate tracing. It will require additional code changes, but maybe result will be satisfying for you and for development team as well. Regarding toolset, of course, there are a lot of tools that can help you with automating all of these steps. For auditing, you can just run them locally, or you can directly integrate it to CI, so developers will see the feedback, right? They change something in a Docker file, and they will see that it brings new security issue at their application, or that they created something that against Docker file best practice, and it will impact, for example, Docker image size or something similar. So I will try to just briefly look through these tools. And regarding documentation, there is no much progress, but if you need to start with something, you can try to go with some README files in the source repository. But if you need something more, you can try to adopt Notion. If if it's not very big company, you don't have some really huge tools like internal GitLab or GitHub or Confluence with Jira. You can try to use Notion for it if it's okay. It has really nice UI. It has some features that allows you to organize everything in convenient pages. And I think it can be a really nice solution for some not very large project. If you are trying to find something more interesting and you want to build company-wide solution for documentation, you can try to check Backstage that was developed in Spotify. Maybe it will work for you because it has really nice features. It has nice UI, and it's not that hard to write documentation because it's still connected with source repository, but you can see a nice visualization for it, and everyone in the company can check the documentation, interactions between several services, and etc. So maybe this solution will work for your case. Regarding deployment to Kubernetes, there are a lot of tools. I personally love to use Helm file for declarative deployments, especially for infrastructure-related services. You can just define all of the Helm releases in one file, and you're good to go. If you want to improve documentation for your Helm charts, you can try to use Helm Docs plugin. And if you want to have more visibility about changes that will be applied during chart deployment, you can try to use diff plugin for Helm as well. Regarding chart testing, there are not much really useful tools. You can give it a try for chart testing framework from Helm itself. It can allow you to verify your charts against some policies if they are well formatted, or they have owners specified in the chart documentation, etc. For smooth upgrade to new Kubernetes version, you can try to use kubewell. It's a very famous tool, or Pluto. They basically do the same, but kubewell validates manifests and Pluto detects deprecated API in some clusters. So it's like a bit different approach, but you can take advantage from any of this tool. Regarding infrastructure, I personally love testing framework for Ansible roles, Molecular. It's not that hard to get started with. They have some examples how to test roles, and if your infrastructure was built using Ansible, maybe this is perfect solution for you to test your huge, like very rich Ansible roles and be sure that your changes won't break anything. And regarding Terraform, there are a lot of different tools, and I love Terraform pre-commit hook because it includes all of the tools that I need, like Teflint, Tefsec, Terraform docs, and so on and so on. And you can use this hook before commit eventually, and also in CI. So it will help you to keep your Terraform files consistent across several repositories, and it's more it will speed up code review process as well. TevSwitch is a simple tool, just version management for Terraform. If you have a lot of Terraform repositories with different Terraform versions, and you don't want to mess up with Terraform state, you can just use TevSwitch and it will work just fine for this specific case. Regarding containers, there are a lot of different tools, but I love to use Headlint because it allows me to like to check my Docker files in code editor in CI, and I can just scale this tool for every repository with Docker file, and it will work just fine. There are like more tools like that, and you can explore them if you want. It's not like only Huddleint and nothing more exists, but I think it's like really nice step in CI to have. Regarding security, I love to use Trivy because it's easily integrated into CI. You can just add scanning for Docker images, and you will see report at the same job, and it's easy to like check, and maybe developers will let's say we'll check it once a week, once a month, once a quarter, and upgrade some base images and stuff. Also we can run Trivy for Git repositories or just file systems. So it's open source and it's easy to use. Maybe for your case it also will work just fine. Regarding analyzing Kubernetes clusters, so for example, you just come to the project and you will see Kubernetes cluster. You need to understand what is going on in this cluster. Several times I used Polaris, just deployed it and check via this UI what are the problems exists in the cluster. It just shows you misconfigurations, missing resources, root users in the manifest, and so on. So it's just a nice tool to start with when you see some Kubernetes cluster in the first time. And also similar tool, Kubebench. It's basically same as Polaris, but it has a bit different checks, and it can be useful if you have like self-hosted Kubernetes cluster, because it can also scan kube API options as well, not just Kubernetes workload. For local development, I'm pretty sure if you use Kubernetes, you know about Minikube and Kind. It's very common tools, and I put it here because I personally uses like every week, every day. But for local development, there are also two interesting tools: Scaffold and Telepresence. Scaffold is more about up and running application inside the Kubernetes cluster, so developer can just using one command build its application, push this builded image to registry, and deploy this application to Kubernetes and see logs from this application at the same time. So it's just an easy way to develop some stuff for Kubernetes. And telepresence, it's a bit different. This tools allows developers to forward traffic from the cluster to local machine, and it can do many more things. So if you or developer need to debug something inside the Kubernetes and you wanna receive some traffic from the cluster to your local machine, you can use telepresence, and you don't need to use kubectl command. You don't need to ask DevOps, right, to check what is going on. Developer can do it by themselves, and it will work fine. I think it's like really useful and not very famous tool across the projects that I've been working on. That's it from my side. I just want to wish you happy sailing at the end, no matter where and how you will work with with modern technologies, with some projects, Kubernetes, not Kubernetes, it doesn't matter. You can be a successful DevOps, write documentation, analyze some environments, and I don't know, make your developers happy at the end. So thank you again. If you have any questions, I will be glad to answer them.